Jessie kept her eyes locked on the horizon, the faint shimmer of heat rising above the foothills. Her hands rested light on the stick, tension held not in her grip, but in the subtle press of her boots on the rudder pedals. At 30,000 feet, flying even with her wingman, everything should have felt calm, but it didn't. Not with the recent enemy pushes and the AWACS chatter threading quiet concern into every vector call. Reed's jet held position off her right wing, tight in formation, maybe 6 feet of sky between the tips. The sunlight caught his canopy just right, glinting gold before bouncing off his vertical stab. Even without looking, she could picture his posture. Casual, helmet tipped just slightly forward, like he was leaning in on a joke he hadn't told yet. They had flown together long enough that she knew his rhythm in the air better than she knew some people's voices on the ground. "Sky's quiet today," Reed said over their private channel, his voice low and even through the calm. "Makes you wonder what we're not seeing." Jessie exhaled slowly before answering. "It's always quiet until it isn't." The AWACS controller chimed in, clear and detached, giving them a new heading and speed correction. There was a tightness in the voice Jessie didn't miss. Threat vector approaching. Nothing confirmed yet. Still time to breathe, but less of it. They banked together, smooth as a pair of blades cutting across glass. Her eagle responded with fluid grace. She could feel the trim beneath her fingertips, each micro-correction holding their path. Reed stayed with her. No deviation, no drift. That was the kind of trust that only came from hours stacked behind the stick, not just in training, but in real-world sky. Missions where the only warning was a radar ping and a breath over the radio that didn't end in words. Jessie rolled her shoulders, checking her systems. Fuel steady, temps clean, no alerts. Outside the canopy, the terrain below blurred in sun-bleached earth tones. On the edge of that ridgeline, just past the faint haze of humidity, was the no-fly zone. They'd pushed this far before, but the last few weeks had changed things. Enemy formations weren't testing anymore. They were pressing. "Still with me. Viper 2, Jessie said, keeping her tone level. "Always," Reed answered. No hesitation. No need for anything else. She smiled. Barely. Not even a real smile. More of a reflex that softened the corners of her mouth. Then she saw it. Just a flicker at first. A shimmer off Reed's starboard wing that didn't belong. She leaned forward in her seat, adjusting angle. There it was again. A dark line trailing the fuselage, fine and fluttering like ink in water. She narrowed her eyes. Not vapor. Not contrail. This was lower, closer to the skin of the jet. "Reed," she said, all casual tones gone. "Check your right wing. I'm seeing something." There was a pause. Not long, but enough. The kind of pause that carried weight. Then Reed's voice came back. Flatter now. Hydraulic pressures down, starboard sides bleeding. Jessie's eyes locked on the fluid stream, now growing more defined as the light shifted. It curled back along the body of the jet, a thin ribbon caught in airflow. Her pulse stayed steady, but she felt her jaw tighten. That wasn't a minor leak. That was a flight control problem waiting to happen. "How bad?" she asked. "I've got full authority for now," he said, "but I'm losing it by the second. Roll input sluggish, rudder feels mushy." Another call from AWACS. Enemy aircraft identified. 2 fast movers, likely flankers, closing from the north-northwest. No engagement yet, but trending in. Jessie flicked her comm back to private. "We hold vector. Stay clean. If they don't push, we don't flare." "You're not peeling off?" Reed asked. Jessie slid her jet slightly closer, wingtip nearly tracing his. "We're still in formation, aren't we?" He didn't answer at first, just the sound of his breath, not shaky, just present. Then a quiet, "Copy that." The space between them became more than just a gap of air. It became the measure of trust, of loyalty. She could feel the heat building through her gloves, sweat forming beneath the collar of her suit. But none of it showed in her voice. She kept scanning the horizon, watching for those enemy fighters, watching for the next decision she didn't want to make. Below them, the terrain blurred past. And above, the sunlight caught the curve of Reed's damaged wing just enough to reflect a faint glimmer back into her eyes. It wasn't smoke, not yet, but it was a warning. The hydraulic fluid trailed longer now, dancing in the slipstream behind his jet like a signal, a quiet flag that something was breaking. Jessie narrowed her focus and matched his altitude to the foot. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not with him still flying. Jessie adjusted her trim and kept her eyes on Reed's jet. The fluid streaming from his wing was no longer a trace. It had thickened, curling in a slow arc beneath him. His fuselage shimmered with residue in the light, like something wounded and trying to stay aloft by force of will alone. She could see him fighting the controls now. His roll was lagging on turns, banking motions drifting off target. He was holding it together, but barely. Their comms stayed quiet for nearly 30 seconds, long enough for her to hear her own breathing inside the helmet, long enough to feel the heat building in the cockpit as they tracked along the edge of hostile airspace. Then came Reed's voice, lower than before. "Flight controls starting to float. Not sure how much longer I've got." Jessie's eyes locked to the edge of his stabilator. The vibration was subtle but steady. He was losing authority. In a two-ship flight, that meant one jet was becoming a liability. Standard protocol was clear. Separate. Maintain survivability for at least one. The moment one bird goes bad, the other breaks away. She ignored protocol. Jessie dropped her left wing, rolled once, and brought herself even closer to Reed's failing jet. Her nose slid slightly ahead of his, shadow casting across the wounded fuselage. Reed didn't speak right away. She didn't expect him to. "Still with me?" he asked after a pause. "Still here," Jessie answered. Her voice stayed flat, clear, not going anywhere. The radar chirped in her headset. Fast movers inbound, 2 o'clock high, Su-35s, likely intercepting now that AWACS had painted a corridor breach. She clicked over to the open channel. "Viper lead. Viper 2 is damaged. We are withdrawing westbound. Request air cover or redirect intercept." AWACS responded in a practiced tone. "Copy. Advise separation and return. Maintain best speed out of threat range." Jessie didn't acknowledge. She switched back to Reed. "They want me to leave you." "Standard play," he said, but the words landed softer than before. He was running the same math she was, and didn't like the answer. She slid closer, wings angled just enough to create drag and match his struggling flight path, close enough now that turbulence off his tail gently rocked her canopy. She was flying dirty, slow, tight, defensive posture in its purest form. "You've got to go," Reed said. "One of us has to make it." "Don't talk," Jessie said. "Fly." His breathing filled the channel. Not panicked. Just there. The kind of sound that says a person is still trying to hold control, even when they know they're losing it. The Su-35s flared in the distance, sunlight catching their canards as they angled in. Jessie marked their positions on radar and visually, confirming that the window was closing. She didn't reach for the throttle. Instead, she stayed just beneath Reed's wing, taking a lower position in his shadow. If they were scanning for vulnerability, she would give them something to find. Her own systems began chirping. Lock warnings, tracking signals, signal strength readings climbing. The terrain to the west was still distant, still unsafe, but it was all they had. Inside her cockpit, Jessie made the silent calculations. Fuel state, flare count, distance to friendlies. None of it looked good. She rolled half a degree more, shielding Reed with her fuselage. The sweat inside her flight suit had soaked through her collar. The air smelled like hot plastic and pressure sealant. She blinked it away and kept flying. "Copy?" she asked softly. Reed hesitated. Then came the breath. Then the word, "Copy." Another radar tone chirped, this one sharper. "SAM site tracking." Jessie's panel lit orange. Launch was likely seconds away. She flipped to flare and chaff, hand hovering. "Reed, ground radar. Hold heading. I'll screen." He didn't argue. His jet was bleeding altitude again. Not freefall, but enough to show loss. Jessie adjusted with him, keeping her nose down, staying directly beneath him. "You stay level," she said. "That's all I need from you. No dramatics, no raised voice, just the mission. Protect him. Keep flying." They were past protocol now, past what flight manuals taught, past what instructors warned you about. This wasn't a mission profile. This was choice. She had made hers the moment she saw the fluid, and if the sky wanted him, it would have to take her first. The missile launched from the ridge and screamed upward on a vapor trail, heat-seeking and steady. Jessie saw the warning flash, heard the alert chirp, and acted in the same breath. She rolled left, dropped altitude, and released flares in a tight burst. The bright decoys shot away from her tail in arcs of glowing orange. The missile snapped toward them and curved sharply to follow her. Not Reed. Her jet rocked violently as the missile detonated close enough to slap her with a shockwave. The right side of her canopy rattled, her wing dipped. She fought the roll with light counterpressure, feeling resistance in the stick. The blast hadn't crippled her, but it had taken a bite out of control. "I've got minor damage," she said calmly, still flying. Reed's voice came through. "Quiet. You pulled it off." She checked her systems. Stabilizer flutter on the right side. Roll control degraded. Some minor electrical flickers on the second bus. Not ideal, but flyable. She stayed low, then climbed gently back to position tight, back into formation with Reed. Fuel status showed under 30%. Her gauge blinked 100.0 remaining. They were deep into stretch range now. AWACS called in again, urging them to break and split routes. Jessie didn't answer. She toggled back to private comms. "Just keep breathing. We've still got space." She kept her eye on Reed's wing. The tremble had worsened. It vibrated slightly at the tip. She could see the play of light off the hydraulic trail. Thinner now, but still there. That line in the air reminded her of blood quiet. Impossible to ignore. A memory slipped forward, clear as day. 2 years earlier, canyon flight in cloud cover, bad intel on enemy air defense. Her own jet had taken damage compressor stall, electronics out, manual control only. She'd started to fall behind. That was when Reed came back for her. Circled wide, dropped altitude, and matched her descent all the way out. She'd never said thank you. He had never asked for it. Now it was her turn. She settled her jet back into the pocket beside him. The geometry of their formation looked clean from the outside, but inside it was all struggle. Every control input was half a second late. Every vibration felt through her boots. Sweat trickled behind her ear and pooled beneath her shoulder blades. Radar pinged again. New track. Another pair of enemy aircraft 40 miles out and closing fast. Flight profile aggressive. "They're sending more," Jessie said. Reed's silence stretched long enough that she thought the comms dropped. Then, "We're not going to outrun them." "No," she said, "but we don't need to outrun them. We just need to hold until we're over the line." She adjusted trim again, checked flare count, and cycled to emergency countermeasure mode. Her jet coughed in protest, but the system loaded, still breathing. The terrain below was flattening. They were nearing the edge of hostile territory, but not close enough. She stared out at the sky, gauging angles, looking for cover that didn't exist. The fuel gauge ticked again, 95.0. She would need to throttle back soon. But if she did, Reed would outpace her, and he couldn't survive alone. The radio remained quiet except for system noise and breathing. Jessie's breath slowed. In, hold, out. Her heartbeat stayed even. Focus narrowed. 1 more minute. 1 more mile. She flew that way, one decision at a time. Reed spoke, voice rough. "I don't want this to be on your record." "It won't be," she said, "because we're both landing wheels down." A flicker of motion in her periphery, his control surface fluttering again. She dipped beneath him just slightly, angling her fuselage to increase radar visibility and shield his profile. This was what loyalty looked like. Not a speech, not a gesture, just shadow on his wing and silence over the mic. Silence. Jessie thought about how many times they'd trained for this kind of scenario. Emergency protocols, wing failure drills, controlled egress from hostile zones, But none of that training ever covered the decision to stay. It always emphasized survival, mission continuation, threat prioritization. What it never taught was what to do when the person on your wing wasn't just a call sign on a flight plan, but someone who had flown back into danger for you more than once. She kept the formation tight. Every second of turbulence passed between their two jets like a conversation. When Reed dipped, she dipped. When he drifted, she corrected to hold his line. Her body had begun to ache from the tension. Not panic, but the kind of muscular fatigue that came from holding a position longer than the aircraft was meant to. Each burst of radio static now carried meaning, a drawn breath, a held silence, and when Reed exhaled, she matched it, synchronizing more than just flight paths. They were flying as one. The enemy jets closed from the rear, tracking fast. Jessie knew they would have to either turn to engage or take fire while exposed, but she also knew turning meant breaking formation, even for a moment. She didn't speak. She just held the line. And so did he. The threat warning spiked again. Jessie's eyes locked onto the radar track, two enemy fighters closing from their six, fast and aggressive. She didn't wait. No time for permission. She threw the stick hard left and pulled, flipping her eagle over Reed's canopy in a sharp, climbing roll. G-forces punched into her chest as the sky rotated in her visor. Her neck screamed in protest, but her grip held firm. She came out of the roll behind the lead flanker and dropped the pipper onto the target. Missile tone confirmed lock. She didn't breathe, just fired. The missile streaked ahead, a white lance in the sky, trailing flame. It took the flanker through the belly. A flash. Then debris spun in all directions. Jessie banked hard, breaking away just as the second fighter shifted position and locked onto her. The warning tone droned in her ears. She jinked low, released flares, then rolled inverted and dove. The pursuing jet stayed on her. Her hands worked instinctively. Flare, roll, climb, dive. Every maneuver sent pain through her shoulders. Every movement brought a fresh chorus of warning tones. Her fuel was now critical. Her right aileron wasn't responding fully. A burst of cannon fire snapped across her left wing, not a hit but close enough to make her flinch. She dove again, pulling beneath a low bank of clouds, using vapor and angle to break radar. The fighter hesitated, lost lock, then turned back, pulling wide into retreat. Not worth the risk. She leveled out low, engines whining. Her systems barked status, fuel in the red. Right side control degraded. Flare count down to single digits. Her breathing was shallow now. Head hot. Fingers numb. But she pulled the stick, climbed back toward Reed. Smoke curled from her own tail section, dark and oily. The panel lights on her right side flickered between amber and red. She flew straight past it all and rejoined his wing. His voice came in rough. "You're hit. You need to brake." She keyed the mic. Exhaled, negative, still flying. He hesitated, then said her name. Just her name. Not a call sign. Not a directive. Just the weight of someone watching you fly straight into fire because of him. She didn't answer. Her presence was the answer. Below them, new tones began to rise. Not aircraft. Ground radar. Another SAM site had them. Jessie scanned the landscape. Ridge east. Tree line west. Launch zone dead ahead. "Ground lock. Stay level," she said. "You don't have the systems to dodge again," he warned. "I don't need to dodge," Jessie replied. She eased the throttle back and dropped below him, placing her eagle directly under his. She matched speed, matched altitude, matched risk. "I see what you're doing," Reed said. His voice broke. "Don't." Jessie said nothing. Just adjusted trim. The air felt heavy. Her engine coughed again. The launch alert screamed. A heat seeker rose in the distance. Reed saw it first and started to drift. She corrected him. "Hold level," she ordered. "I'm taking it." He didn't speak. Couldn't. The silence filled the radio, the space between flares. Jessie's jet flew lower, tighter, dirtier than any formation she'd flown in her life. The missile was coming for heat. Her eagle gave it more to find. She kept her eyes on the sky, on the trail ahead, on the faint shimmer of Reed's damaged stabilizer above her. Her entire world narrowed to the two of them in a strip of sky too small for fear. She deployed flares and cut throttle, the heat seeker angled down. It chose her. The blast radius bloomed behind her as the missile detonated midair, close enough to rattle every bolt in her airframe. Her cockpit jolted sideways. Red lights spilled across the panels. Something popped behind the seat with a metallic crack. She felt her jet stagger beneath her. Her HUD dimmed for 2 seconds before flickering back. She leveled off, control barely responding. The right wing dipped low, dragging like it wanted to pull her into the ground. "I'm still flying," she said, even though her hands were trembling. "Jessie," Reed called again. "You can't." "I already did." She saw the edge of the ridge in the distance. The safe airspace was still out of reach, but closer than it had ever been. The light ahead was different, open, softer, the kind of sky that meant safety. She just had to keep him in it long enough. She rejoined at his 3 o'clock, close enough now that her canopy reflected off the underside of his jet. His fuselage was streaked with black and fluid trails. Her own was worse. They looked like they'd flown through fire. And they had. She caught a glimpse of his helmet as he turned slightly in his seat. Just for a second. No words passed between them. Just that look. A second enemy group was tracking them again from the east, but holding at range. She suspected they'd seen enough. One broken eagle covering another wasn't a target anymore. It was a statement. She held the line. Her fuel readout blinked 82.0. Every second now was something borrowed. No more missiles. No more flares. Nothing left but the shape she flew and the reason she was still up here. And that was enough. Jessie steadied her grip, letting the pressure return slowly through the stick as her eagle righted. The missile had detonated just behind her, close enough to rip through airflow and punch shockwaves through the fuselage. Her warning panels were lit up in chaotic red, flickering like a shorting fuse. A metallic groan echoed through the airframe with every correction. But the jet was still flying, damaged, but holding. She flexed her fingers, then set her hand back on the throttle. Fuel was critical. 61.0 on the readout and falling fast. Right wing stability was minimal. She made minor inputs to test control surfaces. The jet responded, but sluggishly. Her flight path now depended as much on feel as on instruments. She climbed gently to rejoin Reed's wing. His jet, too, trailed smoke and hydraulic residue. Both eagles were marked with black streaks, scorched patches, and noise that didn't belong. Reed had stopped talking. She didn't need him to. The silence between them said everything. It filled the space inside the helmet. No more status updates, no more tactical briefs, just breath, broken only by the occasional tone or engine whine. Jessie leaned forward, adjusting trim by instinct. Her neck ached. The back of her suit clung to her spine with cold sweat. One of her knees trembled against the side panel. She did not adjust. She stayed in place. They crossed the final ridgeline at altitude. Ahead, on the horizon, the first faint shimmer of coastal haze signaled the boundary, the line where friendly airspace began, where others could finally reach them if they called, where weapons would no longer be tracking them from the ground. She blinked sweat from her eyes and keyed the mic. "Visual on the shelf? We're 10 miles out?" Reed's voice returned. Ragged. "Copy. You still good?" Her cockpit rattled. She checked the systems again. The right stabilizer was twitching on telemetry. The rear warning light was glowing a soft, constant red. "Good enough," she answered. As they reached the boundary, the transition was invisible but total. The threat radar faded. The ground tones silenced. The sky stopped hunting them. It was just air again. Just sky. AWACS checked in over the radio. Tone more alert now. "Viper flight. We have visual. Cleared corridor for approach. Emergency response standing by." Jessie didn't respond immediately. She glanced across the short gap between jets. Reed was flying level, but every movement looked cautious, delicate. His systems were likely just as shredded as hers. "You're landing first," she said into the mic. "I can wait," Reed replied, hesitant. "No, you go first." He didn't argue, just veered off toward the beacon. His gear dropped. His approach flared low and steady. Jessie followed half a mile behind, counting her breathing, fingers loose on the controls, knees stiff from holding too long. Reed's wheels touched down. Smoke lifted from his tires, and he rolled hard but controlled. Jessie adjusted descent. Her gear came down late. The nose dipped. Her stick response lagged a full second behind input. She hit the runway long. The wheels struck, and the cockpit jolted. Her braking systems failed partial on contact. She dumped airspeed as fast as the flaps would hold. Her canopy shook violently. The last backup system tripped. The hook dropped. It caught. Sparks trailed behind her as the hook dragged across concrete. Her jet groaned to a halt at the far end of the runway. The windscreen was streaked with soot. Warning lights still blinked. She could smell burnt oil and plastic. The entire cockpit was still humming under residual stress. She didn't move. Reed's voice cracked through the channel again. "Jessie, you still in one piece?" She looked down at the fuel gauge, 0.0, the lowest it could read. "Still here," she said, voice dry. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. She watched ground crew run toward Reed's jet in the distance. Another team jogged toward hers. But Jessie didn't pop the canopy. She stayed seated, helmet pressed back, hands loose now at her sides. The rescue trucks fanned out around the taxiways. Fire suppression gear was ready, but never deployed. No one rushed. Everyone moved with the quiet urgency of those who understood what had just returned from the sky. Inside her canopy, Jessie finally unlatched her harness but didn't move further. Her muscles wouldn't yet cooperate. She was still flying it in her head, every pitch, every pull, every risk she didn't second guess. That wasn't the kind of thing that faded when the wheels stopped. Through the smudged canopy, she could just make out the silhouette of Reed stepping down from his ladder. He stood on the tarmac for a long moment, helmet still on, just looking back at her. One of the ground crew waved, uncertain whether to approach. She gave a small nod. That was enough. Jessie reached up and unlocked the canopy. The air that rushed in was hot, thick with the scent of rubber and scorched steel, but it was air she could breathe without a mask. That felt like a victory. It didn't feel like triumph, just survival, earned and exhausted. The ground shuddered beneath the weight of two returning eagles. Their scorched fuselages groaned as the wheels settled into the runway. Smoke still curled from the heat-soaked metal. The two jets rolled forward slowly, one after the other, their control surfaces stiff and reluctant, as if unwilling to admit they had survived. Jessie's hands remained tight on the stick, guiding the damaged aircraft with deliberate, restrained pressure. Every vibration, every warning chime still flickering, was catalogued and ignored. She had eyes only for Reed's jet ahead of her. When the final braking force bled away and her aircraft stilled, Jessie exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The canopy hissed as it lifted. Heat rushed out and new air rushed in, dusty and tainted with burnt fuel. She reached up, unclipped her oxygen mask, and let it hang. Sweat streaked her temple. Her gloves, stiff with dried moisture, came off one by one. She clipped them to her belt as always. Ritual never changed, no matter how close it had come. Reed had already dismounted. His figure moved with hesitation across the tarmac, arms slightly raised, as if unsure whether he had permission to feel the ground. The moment he reached her ladder, Jessie remained seated, hands resting on the lip of the cockpit. He didn't speak. Neither did she. He reached up, braced himself, and simply placed his arms around her, his head pressed lightly against the flight harness over her chest. He didn't cry. He didn't explain. He just held still for a long, steady moment. Her hand came up, rested briefly between his shoulders. That was enough. Then he stepped back and walked away. Crew chiefs and flight line techs were already moving, quick but not frantic. They knew the look of aircraft that had come home on the edge of failure. One walked alongside Jessie's F-15C, eyes scanning the streaks of fluid that still traced along her starboard intake. Another crew member paused at Reed's Eagle, touching the same burn patterns, the same smoke scars. The damage mirrored itself almost perfectly, a visual echo of their formation, carved into steel. An officer waved Jessie over. She walked slowly, shoulders aching, knees stiff from the G-loads. Inside the debriefing room, the lighting was cool and the air clean. She gave her report with calm precision. Tactical decisions, missile avoidance, hostile aircraft engagement, fuel status, comms integrity. The officer across from her asked about the disobeyed order, the call to break formation, to abandon the damaged wingman. She answered evenly. She had heard the directive. She had made a different call. There was a long pause. The officer nodded once. Nothing further was said. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly. The light on the tarmac was lower now, amber and stretched, casting long reflections across the backs of the two parked Eagles. Jessie walked toward them again, her boots clicking against concrete stained with fuel and brake dust. A ground tech was kneeling beside her jet's tail section, scrubbing dried hydraulic residue with steady hands. He didn't look up, just worked with quiet focus. Behind him, a young mechanic stood beside Reed's aircraft, staring at the matching lines of streaked smoke like they meant something more than damage. Jessie stopped between the jets. They stood wingtip to wingtip now, unmoving but still carrying the memory of motion. The silence between them was no longer broken by radio calls or the sound of breathing through an oxygen mask. Just the soft creak of settling metal, the ping of contracting engine casings, and the dry wind dragging faint dust across the concrete. She turned her gaze skyward. The airspace was clear, nothing in sight. Not a single contrail or glint of sunlight on metal, but she could still see the trail her missile had carved, still feel the echo of that final hard roll, the pressure of gravity trying to peel her away from Reed's side. She remembered the way his voice had cracked when he told her to go, and the way hers had stayed steady when she answered. Walking to the side ladder, Jessie climbed halfway up and paused. The cockpit was open, switches dark, displays black. She didn't get in. Instead, she rested her hand on the edge, fingers trailing the scorched paint. The fuselage was hot even now, its surface telling the story of flame and friction and defiance. Her reflection shimmered in the canopy's curved, sweat-streaked face, hair matted to her braid, eyes not triumphant, but still. Someone behind her whistled low, not at her but at the state of the jet. She took a beating. One tech said softly to another. Jessie didn't respond. She walked down the ladder, feet heavy now. The adrenaline was gone. What remained was resolve, steady and slow. Her gloves were still clipped to her belt. That meant the mission was over. She looked across the tarmac and saw Reed again, seated on a crate, elbows on his knees. He raised his head. Their eyes met for a second. That was enough. No medal would be pinned today. No ceremony. Just the ritual of post-flight reports, maintenance logs, and fuel checks. Jessie would be logged for a systems override during combat. Reed's hydraulic failure would be assessed down to the micron. But no one would document what happened between two jets flying just feet apart through hostile air. No one would write down the moment she took the hit that wasn't meant for her. The sun kept lowering, drawing long shadows under both Eagles. The heat from the engines had faded. The metal began to cool. Behind her, someone called her name, nothing urgent. She didn't turn right away. She placed a hand on the jet's side again, letting it rest there, just a little longer. Some deaths weren't recorded. They weren't spoken aloud or written in a report. They were flown. They were endured. And they were remembered only by those who came back because someone else stayed. When Jessie finally stepped away from her aircraft, the silence moved with her. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something finished, something witnessed, and as the wind swept over the concrete and the night lights flickered on above the hangars, she glanced once more at the sky. Empty now. Not because it was clear, but because it had been held.